Playing.
The Chicago Northwestern during its prime was a predominant user of EMD diesels, whether it was the stylish cab units to the humble yard switchers to the versatile road switchers. This didn't mean the CNW was strictly just EMDs, as they had a fair share of ALCOs, Baldwins, and Fairbanks Morse locomotives, with a fair selection of road and yard power for the Twin Cities road. But amongst the builders, General Electric was not popular of them. Granted, in their later years, they bought many Dash 8s, Dash 9s, and few AC-44s, but beforehand, GE locomotives were rather rare on the CNW, of which only 8 GEs were rostered before the Dash 8s. The Universal series of locomotives were developed by General Electric to compete with EMD's ever-increasing general purpose and special duty models, with their FDL prime movers with 8 and 12 cylinders respectively, and a multitude of models since 1956. The U30C was among the more popular models. Debuting in 1966, they were 6-axle locomotives with 3,000 horsepower thanks to their 16-cylinder FDL engines. They became the best-selling of the 6-axle Universals, with well over 600 examples made. The CNW would only roster 9 of these U-boats, built between January and February of 1968, being the first straight-up GE locomotives on the roster, likely purchased as an experimental period to test out the viability of GE locomotives on the roster. These locomotives, however, weren't in the road's favor, as U-boats were not fitted with automatic train stop, which restricted their route availability, and they were primarily operating on the Twin Cities division, running out of Council Bluffs, Iowa, and up to Minneapolis and St. Paul in Minnesota. This limited route availability did limit them from running to the railroad's namesake capital of Chicago. On top of mechanical issues and the ever-high presence of EMDs, the U-boats didn't last long on the roster, as by 1978, all 9 were returned to General Electric and later resold to the Nacional de Mexico the same year, where they kept their original numbers well into the 80s, and they were never heard of since. Except for one. 934 was built in January 1968 and was the first one to be retired after getting involved in a wreck, being returned to GE in 1977. Instead of being scrapped, however, it was rebuilt into a U34CH, a passenger variant exclusively used for NJ Transit, or Conrail, or Erie-Lackawanna. Anyways, it was the last U34 made for the commuter operations, considering the other 32 locomotives were built between 1970 and 1973. Number 934 became 4183 alongside a new serial number in return. The reborn Bluebird would operate on commuter service out of Hoboken, running on former Erie-Lackawanna trackage on a daily basis, now serving as a passenger locomotive for Northeastern Commuter Agency. However, like many GEs around that time, they were quickly replaced with rebuilt EMDs, with the U-34s all being off the roster by 1996. And while one survived into preservation, 4183 was unfortunately scrapped, likely lasting longer than its classmates. A quiet end for the CNW's Outcast General Electrics. But there's 2 more left. While GE was popular for making road units, they also had a fair game in the switcher market, with their industry-popular Tonner series of locomotives. You might recognize models like the 25-tonner, 44-tonner, and the 70-tonner. These series of locomotives became not only successful on railroads, but also in industrial and shortline use, a case that still remains in the modern day. In an attempt to bring in some new switcher models to the table, GE debuted the SL series in 1974, which took the old tonner designs and made them more boxier with better electrical and power upgrades. The series would run from 1974 and last as long as 1989, with models such as the SL65, SL85, and our subject for this video, the SL144. They racked up 1100 horsepower powered by dual 4-cycle engines, an attractive effort of 86,400 pounds. The CNW would trial out 2 locomotives on a 3-year lease between 1978 and 1981. Being numbered 1198 and 1199, the 2 odd switchers were initially built in 1974 as part of GE's demo fleet, and the 2 switchers were painted up into CNW colors for their trial period. They were primarily found operating at the CNW's larger yards, such as the Proviso Yard in Chicago, Cedar Lake Yard in Minneapolis, and another yard at Escanaba, Michigan apparently, as the 2 locomotives were seen switching out ore cars in this 1978 photo. Their stint on the CNW could only last so long, as once the lease expired, they were off the roster, and the CNW didn't express interest in buying their own. As for the 2 demos though, they were sent over to trial on the Burlington Northern in 1982, lasting under a 2-year demonstration period. They also weren't interested in these tonners, as both locomotives were eventually sold in 1984. 1100 went to the Southern Indiana Electric and Gas Company, and later ending up at Larry's Truck and Electric, the locomotive equivalent to Purgatory. 1101, on the other hand, had a better outcome, as it was sold to the Southwestern Electric Power Company, later becoming American Electric Power, where it's still a switcher at Alliance, Nebraska, still kicking on as an industrial switcher into modern day. Yeah, the CNW wasn't that big in the GE compared to other railroads that went deep into the General Electric addiction. The U-boats were orphans on the roster and disappeared into Mexico, while the 2 tonner switchers were merely on trial, with only one of them surviving into modern day. While these locomotives didn't leave a lasting impact on the CNW's roster, considering that they would eventually buy GEs en masse in their later years before the UP merger. And while the Dash 9s and the Dash 8s left a better impact on the CNW, these 2 locomotive models would be left as the small oddballs in the CNW's locomotive fleet.